presenter today is Tom Fuller, and Tom is the Executive Director of the Kansas Rural Center. He was previously the Horticulture Extension Agent for K-State Research and Extension in Douglas County, Kansas. He also owns and operates a small-scale vegetable farm and has been growing vegetables organically in the Kansas River Valley since 2006. He co-authored Growing Under Cover, a Kansas Grower Guide, and Growing Over Cover, a Kansas Specialty Crop Grower Guide to cover crops. Tom was the founding president of the Kansas City Food Hub, a farmer-owned cooperative, and currently serves as the organization's secretary. Round trip, Tom is going to be driving about 300 miles to be here today, so we are very excited that he's here and what he has to share, so let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. I feel like maybe, you all got the advanced master class here in the first hour, and I'm going to provide maybe not remedial education, but some basic education here. So and you put all those pieces together, and I think you'll have a really well-rounded idea about how to grow healthy soil in your garden. So I do work for the Kansas Rural Center. Our mission is to promote the long-term health of the land and its people using that kind of triple bottom line. So ecologically sound, economically viable, and socially sustainable food and farming systems. And we really think that small farms are critical to help support rural communities. But that's really, that's, I guess, my job. I'm here because I really like to talk about gardening, and I don't get to do that much anymore. I used to do that all the time when I was an extension agent. So what I'll start with is just talking about my own road to soil health. So this is my farm about a decade ago, and it looks pretty much like a lot of other vegetable farms. You see a lot of bare soil there. There's a lot of weeds in between the rows. But the thing that struck me is I was farming, I had farmed on some various rented land, some that had been managed organically since the late 70s, and some other that hadn't been. I noticed kind of the difference in those production potentials. But I was doing fine on my farm really until 2012, which if anybody remembers, we had a pretty significant drought that year. I have a light silt loam soil that does not hold moisture well. So in a year when you don't have much moisture, it doesn't hold moisture well. I had a lot of problems that year. So I started spending a lot of time learning about soil. How could I grow things better? So in a drought year, it's a problem. And also in wet times, that can be a problem. So this is another one of my fields, some brassicas. What you can kind of see here, this isn't a great picture. I took this years ago before I was thinking about these things, but I don't have an up-close picture. But there, you can see we've been harvesting this lettuce, so there's all these wet spots, which is where we walked through our field. You wear your mud boots and you sink in about to there. And this looked like a normal field to me. The crops are apparently healthy. But that's not really the way things should be. I started learning more about soils, and I'll share that with you in just a minute. But you shouldn't be able to sink into your soil that much. My soil was really lacking structure, in part because I have been farming organically, and organic weed control mostly consists of tillage. So we till our soil all the time, run through here with cultivators to keep the weeds out from in between the rows. And all of that, we're destroying that soil structure. So those 600 miles of mycorrhizal fungi that Lauren mentioned, we were destroying those every time we drive through, cutting those up with a tiller or a cultivator. And I didn't know that. This is how I'd learned how to grow things, so that's how I was doing it. So I started after 2012 learning a lot about soil, learning how to grow vegetables differently. So I'll just share a little bit of that with you. This is not on my farm, but I just love this picture because it really shows the importance of soil. So these two rows here are okra. Those two rows are also okra. This was planted at the same time. Those are actually continuous rows. But 30 years ago, this used to be an area that they drove their trucks through all the time. It was a turnaround on the farm. And they hadn't had it like that forever, but you can still see how much, and it looks just the same here. I mean, looking at the top of the soil, you don't notice the difference, but you can sure see it, like in what the soil's doing for those crops or not doing. You know, so these are maybe 2 feet tall. Those are probably about 6 feet tall. Planted the same date, same varieties, all of that. These did a little bit better, the burgundy okra, but the plants are just so sparse compared to what they are down there. So this is really like, you know, one of these things that just gives me this message that like how we manage our soils really matters, and how you treat it, or even how it got treated long ago, can have long-term impacts on how well your garden grows. So when we talk about soil, we're talking about a lot of different things. And I don't have time to cover all of these things, but I'm happy to provide a quick overview of all of these different properties and answer any questions. So when we talk about soil, we often talk about like the physical characteristics of that. So I mentioned structure before. Things like compaction, that's a physical property of our soil. The porosity, how much moisture it can absorb, how many nutrients it can hold. That's kind of a crossover between physical and chemical. You know, how water moves through it. If you have a compacted heavy clay, water's just going to stand there, versus if you have, like I said, sort of a light loamy soil, water can move through it pretty quickly. Chemical processes, if you go get a soil test from your extension office, this is what it's going to tell you. It's not going to tell you probably anything about any of those other issues, structure or texture, but it will tell you about the pH, what kind of nutrients are available in your soil, or are present, maybe I won't say available, but what kind of nutrients are there. And then this one is really the last there, that biological window. That's what I like to say is like the newest area of understanding. The physical properties, I think we've known about those since, I don't know what, I think Aristotle writes about them. You know, for like ancient people, you can go out and see soil. So people are well aware of the physical properties. Chemical properties, we really understood how to analyze those maybe like 150 years ago. The science of chemistry helped us figure that out. And then these biological properties are things people have really started figuring out over probably the last 50 years, and really how important they are. So Lauren mentioned, you know, having billions of microorganisms in a single tablespoon of soil, of healthy soil. You know, those are your microfauna. If you see worms, they're your macrofauna. All kinds of microorganisms, roots, all kinds of biological activity is occurring in your soil. And what I think some people maybe have it intuitively known for a long time, but scientists didn't really figure out until recently, is how important all of that is for our plant life. So all of those microorganisms have relationships, some good and some bad, with our plants. So those are the kind of different windows into understanding soil. And when we talk about soil, we're talking about, you know, you go pick it up off the ground. Well, only 50% of that's really something solid. The other half of it is air and water, and that's just a generalized number. So that's if you have a compacted soil that doesn't have much airspace or water, it's going to be less. But this is kind of an average soil. Organic matter, 5%. Some of it's a lot less than that. In my farm, when I got it, was about 1.5% organic matter on most of my fields, which isn't good. And so that's a general idea of like, what are you looking at when we're talking about soil? And then when we look at just that half that's actual particles, it's made up of 3 different sizes of particles: sand, silt, and clay. And this is just a relative idea of what that looks like. And so if you imagine that you have a sandy soil, you've got a bunch of these big chunks with a lot of air space, pore space in between them, so water can flow through. It's very easily drained. If you imagine filling this whole square with these little tiny clay particles, they could be packed in there really densely and hardly anything can move through that. Silt's kind of in the middle. All soils have a mixture of these in some ratio, which gives us our soil texture triangle. We don't need to go into all of these, but here, you know, the sandier it is, you get like a sandy loam, or all the way if it's 100% sand, it's just sand, versus clay here. If you're 50% clay, you're in a clay soil, and then heavy clay. And any of those are going to have special challenges for gardening. But what I want to say is for both of these that have different challenges, like sandy is too well drained, it doesn't hold nutrients very well. Clay does not drain enough, it can hold a ton of nutrients, but that also means if you're adding fertilizer, you have to add more to actually have an impact. Both of those soils kind of have problems, challenges, not problems, but and then we think of these loams as like the happy median, like if you have loamy soil, that's good soil. The thing that's really great about that is if you work to boost your soil health, which I'll talk about how to do that. You heard some great examples of how to do that. You help both of those kinds of problem soils. So if you have healthier soil that's sandy, it will hold water better, it will hold nutrients better. And if you have healthier soil that's in that clay area, it will drain better. Healthy soil is really kind of the answer to the problems of all different kinds of soils. I did mention structure earlier, so that triangle is the texture of your soil. Texture isn't something you can really change. If you had a reasonable sized garden and you wanted to make it sandier, say you have a clay soil, you would have to dump like many dump trucks full of sand on there to change that texture. So we don't say that texture is something you can change, but structure is something you can change. So this is if you have that clay soil, it's wet and you drive a heavy truck over it, you're going to compact that and you've just changed the structure. Likewise, if you rototill it, you temporarily kind of fluff it up, but you break up all the aggregates that are in there, or many of the aggregates. So then it gets fluffy, it looks really nice for a couple of weeks, then it settles back down and is probably lower than you started with because all that airspace got beat out of the soil. The things that are holding these particles together get killed because a lot of that's held together by fungi and living things in the soil. So you can change your structure. You can change it for the better by improving the health of your soil, but generally it's easy to change it for the worse. So you have to be very careful with that. Soil aggregates are really the key thing we're looking to build. So there's the different size particles in there. They're held together by this kind of glue of organic matter and clay. Some of those microorganisms actually, will break down carbon and secrete glue to glue these particles together. This is a sign of nice, healthy soil if you have good soil aggregates. And if you treat it poorly, you can break up all those aggregates and have less healthy soil. Yeah, I just threw this in here if we're talking about chemical properties of soil. This is a standard, unless they've changed it in the past few years, standard K-State soil test report, which will show you some of the chemical properties, how many parts per million of potassium. The standard test is usually just phosphorus and potassium. I paid for some extras on this one, and it'll show you your organic matter percent. So this is, 2.8. As I mentioned, when I started, this was all like 1 point something. So healthy soil's an easy indicator of that is if your organic matter number is going up. It's not always the only indicator, but that's an easy indicator.
So was that a healthy soil percent then?
This one, it's getting better, so it's going up, so it's moving in the right direction.
What does your organic matter need to be at to be optimum?
Well, so that's a complicated question. It depends on where you're at in the country, what the historical soil was, but around here, the numbers I've heard is that 6 is a pretty good number, kind of like the natural. If you go out to a prairie and would sample it, the organic matter in there would be something probably around 6 to maybe 7% at the most.
The interesting fact is over 0.5% of organic matter will hold an inch of water.
Wow.
And that's why if you get it up 6, like in Minnesota or someplace, or Iowa, they get one good rain in the summertime. They're good.
Yeah.
It holds it for weeks.
And they tend to have more because it breaks down in warmer. So Texas organic matters tend to be lower than us. Minnesota, Dakotas tend to be, that cooler weather. It doesn't break down as much up there. The other challenge is, I've said this in talks before, like more organic matter is good, and I get people that have a small garden and access to lots of compost, and I've seen that number 19% organic matter, which I used to say like, nah, no organic matter is too much, but you actually can get some problems with it at that high of levels in terms of just like you almost have too many nutrients. So moving up is generally good, but like kind of within reason, I guess. Yeah, and here's really, that biological view, thinking about your garden. There's your garden plants as part of a whole ecosystem. So all sorts of things are moving in there, all the way as little microorganisms to things like worms that we can see and bugs, bugs above ground, all those things. So thinking of your garden as part of that ecosystem is actually a really helpful way to manage it for soil health. And I'll talk more about some specific practices. And we talked about these mycorrhizal fungi before. This is like a scanning electron microscope view. These are actually plant cells, and that little broccoli-looking thing is the fungi living inside the plant cells. And then you see these are the hyphae going out there. So these fungi can actually go out and they'll get nutrients from a big area and transport it into the plant cells, and then the plant feeds it nutrients, carbohydrates. So they've got a symbiotic relationship going there, but basically they can act as a bigger root system for your plants to help your plants more effectively access nutrients, which is one of the reasons we don't want to kill them and break them up. So soil health, that's the idea that we're allowing soil to function as this vital ecosystem. So maybe you've heard soil fertility. I always like to think of soil fertility as thinking like your soil's a container. You need some nutrients, you just pour the nutrients into that container. But for soil health is really thinking about it as like that whole living system that allows your plants to access those nutrients. So anyway, that's kind of the quick overview. And people say, soil health is really kind of in the middle of managing all of those properties. So treating it right on its structure, making sure there are the right nutrients in your soil for sure, but also making sure that biological life can flourish in your soil. And so here are the benefits on large scales. If you have healthier soils, you'll have reduced erosion. It increases your plant's abilities to access nutrients. So even if those nutrients are there on a soil test, if your plants can't get them, it doesn't really matter. Having healthy soil helps your plants get the nutrients that are there. It allows your garden to soak up more water. So if we get a heavy rainstorm, more of it will go into the garden and less of it will wash off. And then interesting, as it soaks more up, it keeps that water for a longer period of time. So if we get one of these heavy rainstorms and we have 6 weeks without rain, which seems like it's happening increasingly, your garden will better be able to hold that water in those drier times. And the end result of this is that you get increased productivity. And this is increasingly important under times of stress for the plants. So healthier soils basically equal happier plants. If we're in a drought or something, all the plants are unhappy, but healthy soil plants will be less unhappy.
Tom, just
Yep.
a minute, just on the farm, one thing we've noticed, it doesn't happen overnight.
Yes, we'll get there. I think that's my last slide. It does take a while. And if you have, imagine that you're trying to build this ecosystem and there's nothing there. It takes a while to get those microbes there, get them happy, all of that. So it takes a while. So that increased productivity isn't going to come tomorrow, or I guess not a lot's growing right now, so it's not going to come, next June probably. But if you start making those changes going forward, you'll see that increased productivity.
We just saw it happen this year. In the past, people that I work with have been disappointed that cover crops haven't been working. And we kind of the same way saw some things. But this year, in spots where we had rye growing and cover crops 3 years ago, were better this year in the drought. For the ones that we just started a year or so ago, I think it hurt us. But 3 years down the road, and I could give you another example.
Yeah. And one of the things I think I had a link to a video here, but I put too many slides in, so I don't have time to show the video. But if you look up aggregate stability, it's a weird thing to put in your YouTube search, but you'll find some videos where they show, between a farm with healthy soil that hasn't been tilled and something that's just tilled, so like or a garden soil that's been tilled, you take something like this from a healthy soil thing, you put it in a tube of water, and it will sit there and it will soak up the water. If you put something like that, a chunk from soil that's not healthy, you put it in a tube of water, it just dissolves into dust. Well, I guess it's not dust because it's wet, but mud. But then at the end of that, you leave it in there for a few minutes. You pull that out, you can crack it open, water's gone all the way through it, it's soaked up all that water, but those glues and things like that from those microorganisms hold it together, which is why that allows it to soak up more water, not run off, things like that. Just as an aside, talked a little bit about healthy soils before, what to look for. Another thing, if you don't see the worms, those are like tunnels where earthworms come through. So if you get your shovel, which is always the best way to experience garden soil, I think, go out and look at it. You dig up some and you see things like that, there's biological activity going on in there, even if you don't, throw some underwear in there and watch it dissolve. But yeah, so, here again, just to go back on this rainfall absorption, like Lauren said earlier, the one they had the cover crops on was too wet when the rest of their fields were too dry. Well, here, it's too wet in that area because the soil's not soaking up the rain because it's not healthy soils there. So the water's just standing on top. I have pretty flat fields, so if I had any slope, it would be running off instead of soaking in, even though we hadn't had a ton of rain there. And so the key point, I'm going to get to how to manage it. I hopefully have sold you, we've all sold you on the idea of having healthier soil in your gardens. But the key point is that how you manage your garden soil matters. So these two soils look pretty similar, and they're actually right beside each other in my garden. But this one I had not tilled. That one I ran a rototiller over it. So with good management, untilled soil can look pretty similar to that. But this is after we had some rain. So this one still looks kind of similar. You can see the chunks there. This is like pulverized into a dust. All the dark organic matter had run off and pooled here in the middle. And that was starting to crust over. So this is nice. Little seedlings could pop up through that. That gets real crusty pretty fast after a rain because it doesn't have that structure. It doesn't have the aggregate stability. So it kind of turns into dust and then it hardens off again. And you have to go through and kind of like crack the top of your soil so little seedlings can get through it. So how you manage it matters. Those are the same soils, row next to row. The one that was problematic had been tilled, the other one had not. And so what's healthy soil look like? Sometimes people say it looks like black cottage cheese. So you can see those aggregates. It's not just like fine and powdery. Again, there's some YouTubes there, just some pictures of soil. This is something I did a few years ago for, again, different management styles. These are all on my farm, all the same types of soil. This was taken in February. I guess that's probably been 5 years ago now. So everything's the same except how this had been managed. So this is a field that had been tilled. I don't remember what I had in here, some fall radishes, so it had been tilled probably in August. It wasn't a particularly wet winter at that point, but it looks terribly dry. Here's the same thing that's under some cover. So these leaves, that's a kale plant. There's some living plants there. But look at how much, didn't shear off in that weird, funky way. You can see nice aggregate texture in there. All of that is just the difference of this wasn't tilled in the fall. This has cover on it, and this has a plant living there. I mean, the other one has a few little weeds growing, but not really any significant root systems. All of those things help your soil be healthier. This is under a cover crop, and it's a little hard to see. Has similar visual structure to that last one. You can still see the aggregates. You can see tons of roots in there from that cover crop. And then you can kind of see a little bit of this blacker streaks through there. So that's area of increased organic matter where those roots are actually exuding carbon into the soil. Yeah, and then this is this is just down kind of in the area we don't farm, the turnaround at the end of the field. And so this soil has not been worked at all. I should have got a closer picture, but it is rich and black compared to, you know, going back to that one, or that one's pretty okay. That one's super pale and sickly looking, you know. So the difference in how these are managed really is visibly different, and they perform differently when you're growing things in them.
What was that last picture? What was that in? Is that in one of your production areas?
No, it's just outside of it. So that's never been till, I mean, or maybe it has been 40 years ago or something, but it's almost to a tree row, so just kind of out of that. So it's like almost the native area, and it just like the soil's like a different color. It's so much richer and nicer looking when no one's gone through and tilled it or whatever. You can get really fancy soil tests that will tell you how healthy your soil is beyond the organic matter number. So this one, I actually don't have the second page of it, where they have that. But the challenge with that is it's fun information to have. But like a soil test at K-State, I don't know what they cost, $13, or maybe with inflation they're $15 now. A test that really shows you the high-end stuff is like $75 or $50 to $75. Yeah, here's the soil health assessment. So they end up giving you a score based on all kinds of like what's the biological activity in the soil, what sort of more detailed micronutrient analysis.
Is that the same as a Haney?
This is based on the Haney test. So this is Midwest Labs. They call it their soil test their soil health complete series. And so yeah, the Haney test is the Solvita burst. I can't remember the other two things that are in there. So they give you this calculation, yeah, that's based on Haney's work right there.
So does this test like that, do you have to take the soil under certain conditions?
No, you just take it and send it in. So
Okay, it's not under certain conditions to have the best or
no.
more accurate reading.
So yeah, the thing about soil testing is it varies throughout the season.
Yeah, sure.
So having it consistently, so if you take it in the fall, take it in the fall again.
Just specific
But this
relative
test
conditions.
doesn't require anything specific. Like you just send in the same sample you would to K-State. They just do different tests on it. So there's a lot of other tests you can get in there if you really want to know about like what are the different microbes in your soil. There's like the phosphofatty acid lipid assessment, things like that. But you know, this kind of shows you some things. The one thing I would say that I learned from doing the more in-depth soil health assessment, I mentioned before having more organic matter isn't always good, but it is most of the time. It's the cheap way to figure out if you're doing good, if you're moving that up. But like I took a test in my field and I took a test in a high tunnel. The high tunnel I had very intensively added compost to because it's a small area, so I could dump a ton on there. It had a lot higher organic matter rating, but the soil health was a lot lower because basically inside a high tunnel, it's more or less like a desert. So it's hard for all those microbes to live in the ground there because they don't get rained on. They don't get any of those things. So if I had just taken the organic matter test, I would have thought that was healthier. But if you looked at the whole picture, it wasn't. But that said, if you have two outdoor plots and one of them has a higher organic matter, I would tend to think that's your healthier soil. And you don't have to spend $75.
About that on the high tunnels.
Uh-huh.
What was your salinity on the high tunnel? Because I'm assuming
I don't
fixed high tunnel.
I don't remember there. It wasn't too bad at that point. We'd had K-State doing some research in there, so they'd been monitoring it. But that does tend to build up over time.
That's kind of where the advent of the mobile
Right.
high tunnel has come about. So then,
Yeah.
then you don't have that
That's why
problem.
we went to the smaller mobile ones.
Right,
Is that
right.
if we get rain, we have the cover crop and move it on.
So there's no solution for a high tunnel that's fixed?
Well, there is. So the solution is ideally to keep the cover off. So I've got two at home. Neither of them have plastic on them now. So if we get rain this winter, which I'm hoping we do at some point, it will wash the salinity through the system. But in an area like that where you're irrigating, the water evaporates, but there's nothing washing it through, it can build up in the surface levels of a high
Well,
tunnel.
there is a solution. The whole time you take all the dirt out.
Yeah.
And brand new dirt is what they used to do in the days of glass high tunnels. Yeah, that's
But that's up your microorganisms?
yes,
though?
yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, it'll get to the point where
You can't grow anything in there really, yeah.
So it's easier to take the top off and just let it
Yeah.
do its thing.
Right, and especially unless, yeah, especially if you're not doing year-round production. But even people that do year-round will do that every, I don't know, 5 or 6 years just to let it flush through. So, yeah. Anyhow,
The plastic will blow off anyway.
yeah, that's true. And then it's a good time to just let it rest for a little while. So, yeah. So this is from NRCS. They have a nice soil health website, but I like it because there's these 4 things that they say, if you do this, you're improving your soil health. And what I like about these is you can do them on any scale. So if you had a farm of 1,000 acres, you could be doing these things. If you have a garden, you can do the same things. What that looks like is different, but you do those same principles and you're going to be building healthy soils. So I'll run through some of what that looks like at the garden scale. So providing continuous living roots, minimizing disturbance, maximizing biodiversity, and maximizing soil cover. So minimizing disturbance, going with, on the field, they used to call it conservation tillage, and they'd move to these chisel plows instead of the big plows that flip everything over. You can do the same thing in a garden. We call it vertical tillage. They sell these garden forks. You go through, it can kind of aerate your soil, but you're not inverting the soil layers like you would if you ran a rototiller through there. These are helpful tools. You can do really shallow tillage. Again, it's probably not ideal, but we're not saying eliminate disturbance. We're saying minimize it. So if you need to get a nice seed bed for planting in, if you're direct seeding some lettuces or something with a small seed like that, doing a really shallow tillage, you're going to disrupt all those microorganisms right on the surface, but you're going to leave the ones below intact rather than, sinking that rototiller as deep as you can go as shallow as you can go.
So just like with a hoe or whatever.
With a hoe or whatever, however you're disturbing it, just try and do it less aggressively, like not going as deep. So no-till, there's good ways to do that in gardening at some scale. So they talked about rolling down a cover crops. You can do that. Or you can use heavy mulch. So the Ruth Stout garden method, that's more or less her method, is just like put deep mulch of straw on top of a garden, and you've got a no-till garden. Roll a cover crop. There's something called occultation. And solarization. I think I've got both of those. Nope, just occultation. So occultation is basically using tarps to keep light off your garden. So when you're not growing something, if you put a dark or opaque plastic tarp out there, it will keep things from growing. You pull it back and you'll have a surface that you can plant in usually. So it's not like a 1-week process, but if it's like over winter, so that picture I had earlier of the fields that look, or the plots that looked the same, one of which had been tilled and the other one hadn't, I had just put a tarp over that over the winter and pulled it back. It looked the same as if it had been rototilled, but it had not.
So water doesn't go through during that time?
Water doesn't go through during that time.
Does that kill bindweed?
It can. So if you're going to try and kill bindweed, you'd probably have to do it for over a year. So doing it so normally for occultation, depending on the season, if it's really hot, you need it less time. If it's colder, you need it more time. But so maybe 6 weeks. But that's not. You pull it off in 6 weeks, and your bindweed's just going to pop right back up. So bindweed is a hard one to deal with. Stinging nettles a little less hard to deal with, I think. It's also a challenge. Any perennial weeds, Johnson grass, where there's a lot of energy stored in that root system, a brief thing that would kill an annual weed isn't going to kill that. So you'd have to use a longer season.
On a smaller scale, to terminate a cover crop, guys will actually use like a silage tarp, cover the cover crop for like 10 days.
Yeah.
And it'll kill the cover crop. So if you don't have a roller, or you can use a rope and a 2x4 or 4x4, and you step on it, you go along the row, but stuff's got to be at the right stage.
Right.
A tarp solarizing.
Yeah, and so I put occultation. I didn't put solarization. Solarization is the same idea, but you're using clear plastic. And if you're doing that, you want to seal the edges. And basically, you're trying to make a little greenhouse on your garden. And if you do that in the summer, you're going to raise the soil temperatures dramatically. You're going to kill a lot of the good things, but you're also going to kill the bad things and sterilize weed seeds. The good things will come back relatively quickly is what the research shows. But that's also a way to kind of prepare things, but it has a slightly different purpose. But if you have a lot of weed problems and you're able to take that area out of production in the summer, you could try that because it will sterilize the weed seeds. It might take care of some Johnson grass. Bindweed, the roots are way too deep, so it would come back. But
How long would you do that?
in the peak of summer, probably 6 weeks. If you were doing it at the beginning or end longer, just because if it's really hot. Yeah, the soil temperatures. I don't remember what I've seen them studies measure, but like 6 or 8 inches, they'll be at like 120, 130 degrees, and you need it to get there to sterilize those weed seeds.
So there is no solution for bindweed? That's what I'm hearing.
Repeated attacks on it is basically the solution. So K-State has a publication from like 1933 before herbicides were widely available. And if a farmer had a field that was full of bindweed, what they recommended was taking it out of production for a year and basically going through and tilling like every 2 weeks. So you kill it, it grows back from the roots. So just depriving the roots of that new energy. But it takes a long time if you're doing that. You can also, organically, there's nothing you can really spray that'll take care of bindweed. If you're not going organically, you can treat it with a systemic, like Roundup, spot spraying it. So yeah, and that would transport down to the roots and kill the roots.
It's hard because they actually do it.
Yeah, probably not on the first try. Yeah, it's definitely a challenging, one of the challenging weeds. Yeah, and then. On that note, the last way to really minimize disturbance in your garden is to grow perennial crops. So things like asparagus, you plant it, it's there for 20 years. Anything else you can think of, trees, the grapes you guys had. Planting those perennials ensures that area is not going to be disturbed for however long you want to leave that there. The challenge is then really, managing those perennial weeds are also a challenge. So yeah, here's a field that I did deep mulching on. You can see, actually I didn't know this when I had tilled it before, but there is a low spot in the middle of the field where nothing wanted to grow. But this is like 9 inches of straw on the field. So this 1/4 acre field, in the 2 years we had it before the straw kind of broke down, the first year in the 1/4 acre, we spent literally 15 minutes weeding the field the whole season. So the straw just crushed all the weeds. We did have some problems. As the straw is breaking down, it can compete with your plants for nutrients. So you have to watch for that and probably add a little extra nitrogen. But that deep mulching system can be a very effective way to do no-till in your garden.
Did you have wheat coming up through the straw?
We didn't. This straw was pretty clean. We did actually have, we got this, so this was all straw except we had 1 bale of alfalfa hay that the farmer gave us. So we put that, actually it's right here, which looked really healthy that year, but it also had bindweed in it. So we didn't have bindweed on our farm till we brought that bale of alfalfa hay. So yeah. So anyway, yeah, if you have clean
Not everybody
straw.
does. What do you recommend for wheat coming up in the?
It's a cover crop.
Yeah, I mean that's what you might have to disturb it a little bit, but usually if you put it on thickly enough too, the wheat that's germinating at the soil level. I mean, I'm like this is 9 inches of straw, so it's not. It's a lot of straw. It's a big investment unless you know somebody with straw. And I would say if you're doing this kind of system, you would probably want to use straw rather than hay, not just because of the fewer seeds in it, but also the hay will break down really quickly. It's a great way to add some nutrients to your soil if you want that hay, but it's not going to provide you season weed-free coverage.
What about wood chips?
Wood chips would also work. So
If you have access to
if you have access to them, yeah. So if you've got an arborist that's going to dump a lot of chips at your place, like the tree service, you could definitely do that in a garden. We've done some over here with shallots under wood chips. The problem is, I guess, depending on what your end game is for that garden, So wood chips, if you just keep adding them, would be fine. If at any point you do go back and till and mix those into the soil, they're going to take a while to break down, and they're going to pull a lot of nitrogen out of your garden while they're breaking down. So straw breaks down more quickly than wood chips. So, and then you can incorporate it and it breaks down, but wood chips stay longer.
And then there's a difference between wood chips and then what is it, ramial?
Oh, yeah, ramial wood chips that are,
It's the whole branch and the leaves.
yeah.
And it's different than what,
Right, and so if you get the ramial wood chips, people like that often in orcharding because it introduces some of those biology, some of the like bacterial and fungi that have relationships with the trees. It will introduce those into your garden.
We bought a wood chipper just to take the leaves or limbs that fall down
And we do the whole.
Now, we like leaves too,
Yeah, leaves are great.
Yeah,
because we can get them free.
yeah.
We can get straw free.
So yeah, if you have a smallish garden and access to anything, I think the easiest way to go no-till is definitely like just mulching, deep mulching things. Occultation I mentioned, that's just like a piece of silage tarp. Here in Kansas, you do have to weigh those down pretty heavily. And even if you weigh them down very heavily, you're going to look out sometime and it's going to be flapping in the wind if you see it before it goes. But yeah, leaving that out for a little while is helpful. So that's kind of some ways to keep those things covered or to minimize disturbance, I guess. If we want to talk about maximizing that ground cover, cover cropping is a great way to do that. So when you're not growing something in your garden that you're trying to eat, plant something else just to keep that ground covered. Mulching, again, is a practice that can help you maximize cover. Increasing your planting density can help. Leaving less soil area exposed, which will help protect the soil surface, but it also cuts down on the amount of weeds germinating there. Of course, you have to balance that with some crops. If you plant them too closely together, then they compete with each other and you get a lower yield. But a lot of things you can plant a little closer together. So lettuces maybe 9 inches on center rather than a foot on center or something like that really provides additional cover. Yeah, so just some pictures of those things. Here's a cover crop. This is rye and Austrian winter peas. Those work where I'm at. I don't know if they'd work here. I think we're kind of on the... They'll work here? Okay. I like Austrian winter peas. They're a legume versus hairy vetch, which is also a legume, but these are a lot easier to kill. Hairy vetch, kind of, if you put it out there, sometimes it comes back, which can be nice, but it can also become a weed problem.
You want to graze something, boy, that is ideal. The cows love it.
And so this is something that I rolled, but I don't have a roller crimper. I just have a mower on the back of my tractor, and I just drove through with the mower off and just kind of dragged it over this. So when you get to the point, so these are just starting to head out, but they don't have viable seeds. When they get to that point, then if you snap the stem, it'll die. When it's younger, when it's more grassy, you could run through it and it would just bounce back. But once they start kind of drying down, you can see it's like lighter green. And then those peas, like they're easy to kill. Like you can step on them and they die.
When the rye and stuff is starting to bloom, the little seeds or the blooms coming off of it.
Yeah.
Pieces. That is the time to roll it.
So on the rolling for a small area, like my small garden, you said something about a board. Is that like what they use for crop circles to make those crop?
Same idea, yep.
Same thing, okay.
Yeah, so like that, and I've seen even, so anything that you can get to snap that stem off would work. So yeah, a board with ropes, I've seen, walking through like that. I've seen a picture of a guy doing this on a bigger garden with just his riding lawnmower, again, with the blade guard down but not mowing, and just pushing.
Can do that.
Yeah, and so he just drove circles around his garden and it terminated the cover crop perfectly. A car, yeah.
if you have a really low sitting car and you can get to it, yeah. There's a video out there on YouTube somewhere.
Yeah.
On Facebook of Ray Archuleta doing it with his daughters.
So if you get it at the right stage, just snapping that stem over, however you want to do that, will kill it. And then you'll have some mulch there. Sometimes that's an adequate mulch, but sometimes, like when I've done it, it worked on like 3 of the 4 rows. One row, the crop was a little bit sparse in there, and so then some weeds would grow through it. So I probably should have gone back and added some more straw on top of it. But I was doing an experiment, so I didn't do that.
Question, you like grow this and then you're breaking it like before winter?
So for this, that would probably be terminated where I'm at in the middle of May. So you have to wait for the growth stages. So if,
Planting it now.
but if you planted it now, it would look just like a wheat field out there, little green, all winter. And then when it warms up, it's going to take off, and then it'll get to be, 4 or 5 feet tall, start heading out, and that's when you want
I don't understand how you get a seed in that thick of like cover. Like I don't understand how to plant my seeds.
So for direct seeding, unless it's a large seeded crop, that is a little bit of a challenge. So if you're doing transplants, it works better.
So plants.
So plants
Little seeds.
versus little seeds. The other thing, again, so this is something you'd be taking out like in mid or late May. So this would work for like your tomatoes, things like that, but things you want to plant early, like your potatoes or things like that, that's where you'd want to do the other mix you mentioned, which was oats and some things that will kill at the winter. So they'll provide that cover. There'll be dead plants on the surface over the winter, but then in the spring when you want to plant, they will have broken down, and you can probably direct seed into that. There's some good, is it Delaware or Maryland has a good resource about that, and like if you have the Earthway garden seeder, like it'll tell you what plates you can use to plant the different cover crops, and then yeah.
I frequently just scatter the seed.
Yeah, if you're doing,
Without covering it?
Without really covering it, or if I feel like it needs covered, I'll use a rake and do a really light, I'll just throw the seed out and then I'll take my rake and do a light
yeah.
kind of covering it generally.
Or if you have any grass, those little hand grass spreaders, we've used those in the gardens at our place.
Some
So.
of the seeds are super fine.
Yeah, so like clover or any of those things are tiny little
Just
seeds.
little lettuce,
Yeah.
carrots.
Yeah,
all
Have
that
you ever
stuff.
tried, just sprinkling some compost on top of the dead plant material and then seed straight into that with the finer seeds?
I have not done that.
I haven't done that either.
Should
If
work.
you just toss your seed out there, that'd be great.
Yeah,
You won't get as even a coverage.
right.
I mean, you'll get, my garden is not exactly 100% flat. So, some of if it rains, then some seed will worsen a low spot and get real thick, and a high spot might be really thin. So it's not super even
But you can go in then with your plant seedlings and kind of plant around that,
around
right?
that. Right.
Because your point is not to plant in rows and
No.
not to till it, and not.
Right.
Okay.
Or if you're really dedicated,
And what
man,
did you
take
say
a pair
that
of scissors.
piece was?
It's called Austrian winter peas.
It's one of these, if you took this,
Yeah.
it's one of these.
Kind of focus on
Okay.
that row and
So you have it written
somehow
down.
get in the, because you're worried about the seed soil contact.
Yeah, so there's other ways. So this is
Yeah.
just mulch again. This wasn't deep mulch. This was just around the garlic and shallots there, just kind of a regular layer of mulch. I've also used, if I've planted small seeds, to protect that soil surface, just like a row cover here. So this is for frost protection in theory, but it's warm now, like in this picture. We weren't using it for frost protection. We were using it to protect the soil surface from heavy rains, to
So
keep...
it will sprout.
Yeah, well, it keeps the moisture there too, but also just to kind of protect the soil, because if you get a heavy rain, it comes through and it compacts the surface, because this was a tilled field here. So then to talk about the next one, maximizing diversity, again, cover cropping. So on 3 of these 4 practices, cover cropping's your friend, which is why it's a great tool. Crop rotation, you can think about that as maximizing your diversity through time, which can help minimize disease pressure. Companion planting is a great way to do that. And then what's called farmscapes or buffer strips. So you could kind of think about this as companion planting, but not necessarily in your row, but next to the row. And animals are a great way to add diversity. So all of those things make your garden soil healthier. These farmscapes or buffer strips is really just planting a mix of flowering plants. And that's really what you want, is flowering plants next to your garden crops. It's been shown, I think, up to about 10% of your garden space planted with a random mix of flowering things will decrease your need for pesticides, because all these flowers are going to attract both the pollinators but also predatory insects, which will then go and eat the things that are trying to eat your veggies. Yeah.
So if you put animals in on your garden, won't that compact your soil? Did you address that?
It will compact your soil, but it will not as heavily. I mean, I guess putting them in there, why? Like if you had a lot of rain, you had a tilled field, you probably wouldn't want to put like cattle out there. They'd be too
I
heavy.
just like to let my donkey in when
Yeah.
they're growing and let her eat whatever
Yes,
she
that's a
wants.
great way to do that. So
But she
adding,
compacts the soil.
yeah,
Not as much as you think.
it will loosen up. I mean, so
Because again, the saliva, the manure, the urine, all of that stuff is so important to.
And
get
maybe don't leave them.
yeah.
throughout.
Like, don't let her just have all the time, like, get her off.
Get her
But
off.
like while there's
Donkey off and buy goats.
but like while there's plants growing there too, those roots protect the soil, so they minimize compaction.
Naughty.
Yeah, so here's just a study, you know, kind of reemphasizing the point I just made. This was somebody down in South Carolina who planted flowering plants next to watermelons, and not just through predation. Some of it was through predation, but also extra pollination. They got like 20% higher yields in the watermelon field that just had native flowers next to it versus the one that was just a regular like mowed border around the watermelon field. So adding that kind of diversity to your garden can really help your yields. Yeah.
We went to no mow May. Now our yard looks terrible in May, but it has made a big difference.
Yeah.
In the insects.
So yeah, providing that habitat. Here's a study where on broccoli and cabbage, those imported cabbage moths got decimated by those predatory wasps, things like that.
Okay,
Which on
that
goldenrod there, but yeah, these guys.
Oh, yeah, those guys.
Yeah, if you have predators, they will eat these. So this wasp actually hunts those. So. And then maintaining continuous living roots. Again, the practice is a great answer for that, cover cropping. Intensifying rotations. So if you're gardening and you take something out, putting another crop in there quickly rather than leaving that sit can help keep living roots in that soil. Living mulch. So some people will plant a low-growing clover near their crops. Depending on what you're growing, that can compete for resources. But clover does fix nitrogen there, so it can also, and it flowers, so it brings in some of those insect friends. And so this is, just like I was talking about in that high tunnel that had a high organic matter, but low soil health. It's like a desert. If you have empty garden space, all those microbes that live in relationship with plants don't have anything to feed them. If they're feeding off, the root exudates of your plants, and there's no plants for 6 months out of the year, that's just like a desert for them too. And perennials, of course, keep those living roots. Yeah, so this is actually in Kansas City, Missouri. This guy has a very ambitious little farm operation, grows a lot of veggies here, but as soon as he cuts something out of here, he plants it back like the next day pretty much. So this was a cover crop he had just mowed, a buckwheat. He just mowed it down with a weed whacker, so you can use that too, I guess. But he was going to plant into that in a couple of days. So tightening up how quickly you take out plants, or you can leave your plants in there longer. So this is a row of kale on my farm that we were done harvesting, but I just left it there. So it's providing flowers for pollinators and predators, and I'm keeping those continuous living roots there, even though that crop is done for me. I'm not going to harvest anything else from that. Really should just till it in and plant something else, but I didn't have time to do that. I talked a lot about cover crops. I don't think I have enough time to go through all my cover crop slides, but here's just a graphic that will talk about the many different benefits of cover crops. What I will say is the information I'm about to just blow through and be happy to answer questions. At the Kansas Rural Center, our website is kansasruralcenter.org. We have publications. This is one of them, Growing Undercover. So this is just tips for growing in a high tunnel. We have a different one. This is volume 2, I guess, or whatever. Volume 1 is really about how to choose a high tunnel that's right for you. And then we have one, this is Growing Undercover. We have one that's called Growing Over Cover that's really about how to integrate cover crops into your fruit and vegetable production. It's stories that are derived mostly from people like commercial production scale, but it has a lot of good information on cover crops. like I'm just going to skip through here. The basics, choosing the right cover crop for your needs, getting that solid stand so you get good coverage is important. So usually if you find a seeding rate online, plant oats at this rate, I would suggest doubling that for a cover crop. Before you plant something, figure out how you're going to kill it. That's really important. And then, tools, it could be just throwing it out there. It could be a broadcast seeder and then raking it in. If you want a really even stand, using an earthway garden seeder or a drill if you have a bigger garden plot and have access to a drill. And then, you can use a mower to kill it at the right time. So this is all the information that I'll just send you to the book. But there's different seasons of cover crops. So cool season covers would be something we would plant now or early in the spring. There are some that will winter kill, some that will overwinter. So you can choose based on your goals. If you're going for that later garden window, maybe something that overwinters. If you want to get in the garden early, you would want something that winter kills. And then you can just kind of choose a cover crop based on what you're trying to do. And again, this is all in the book, so I'm not going to go into it. But if you have a really quick window you want to fill, buckwheat's great. If you have compacted soil, there's something that they'll call tillage radish, or you can buy it in the garden seed called daikon radish. They'll make these big radishes that will burrow down and loosen up your compacted soil. Lots of things to fix nitrogen. And then if you have a break in your garden, say you grow lettuce in the spring, but you're not putting that spot into a summer crop like tomatoes or peppers, you can plant some of these warm season covers, and they're really good, most of them, because they add a lot of biomass. So if you're trying to add that organic matter to your garden, something like sorghum Sudan grass, which is going to get taller than I am, is going to add a ton of biomass. But again, those are things you want to make sure before you plant them, you know how you're going to kill them, because your little mower is probably not going to work that great on the 6-foot sorghum Sudan grass.
Does buckwheat get big? I don't know anything.
Buckwheat does not get big. The thing about buckwheat is it goes to seed really fast. Like 60 days, it'll be seeding, and then you'll have buckwheat in your garden, which isn't a huge problem. It's not a very aggressive plant. It's not hard to kill. Pollinators love it, but no, it gets about this big. It has a very soft stem, so it's another like those peas. You can step on it and kill them.
It'll have a taproot of about the size of a pencil, and it'll go down and bring phosphorus back.
Yeah. And pollinators love it. If you plant buckwheat, like you can literally hear your garden from like 30 feet away because it is just buzzing with those bees.
So can you plant it now, even with it getting cold?
If you plant it now, it'll die at frost.
So nothing can be planted.
So
We have to start over.
now there are things that are frost kill like buckwheat. There are things that are winter kill like oats. So if you planted oats now, you would get a little bit of growth and then they would die. They die when it gets to be like upper teens usually. So you have to have a really hard frost to kill some of those, but they will die usually in like mid-December. But if you were to go out and plant like cereal rye right now, that would grow, and then next May you'd have the 5-foot tall rye.
Next question.
Cereal rye all the way through mid-November.
Okay. Question, where do you get all this? Like,
I don't know around here. That's where we need the.
Contact me and I'll hook you up.
Well, you'll have it, you can get it, Polanski's have a lot of different stuff. The best one,
Yeah, Star Seed has a mix.
or Starseed all the way.
is that a mail order thing? Like, you have to get it?
The best one, and I wish I would have brought it, but the best one by all means is green cover seed out of Clayton, Nebraska.
Hey,
Green cover seed out of Bladen, Nebraska is by far.
Extension office?
And they'll make it for you and stuff. But Starseed, Polanski's, all them basically buy their stuff either from Kaufman's or from Green Cover.
this is almost my last slide. We already made this point, but all the things I talked about, that we've talked about, building healthy soil, those returns are not instant. So when you start doing better soil management, your near surface soil carbon starts to take off, your aggregation, and then somewhere down the line, the last thing to take off really is your productivity. And that can take a couple of years, maybe 3 years. Sometimes for people just transitioning to no-till, they'll say up to 5 years is kind of where things start to exceed where it was. So it might dip the first year and then kind of level back to where you were in terms of productivity, and then it'll take off once you get that healthy soil ecosystem built.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
Just a prime example. I was talking to a guy at a no-till conference. He says, if you ever planted cover crops between a wheat crop, you know, if you went wheat, we did it. We planted a cover crop. We took the wheat off, planted a cover crop, went back to wheat. This cover crop was the millet and, African cabbage and everything like that. It literally grew higher than the tractor. You had to use a GPS to plant the wheat the second year. We took the wheat off, planted the soybean crop. We left the test strip. And we planted double crop soybeans, no difference in yield. I was really disgusted. I thought it was awful. The next year I planted corn in there, took the double crop off, planted the corn. Took and was cutting along, completely planted, forgot about the cover crop. I was watching the yield monitor and I thought, hey, I'm gonna have 200 bushels dry land corn. This is awesome. I was so excited. I turned around and the yield monitor dropped 25 bushel. Boom. I called the young man that farms with me and I said, what the hell did you do? Or whatever. And he come running over and we found the flag that we'd put up in the hedgerow where we literally 2 years later, it made the 25 bushel corn yield difference.
Wow.
But it took 2 years. I thought I'd pissed away $35 worth of seed, cover crop seed and everything else. But it takes a while, so don't get discouraged. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no problem. I think the last thing I have is just some resources to direct you to. If you're really interested in this stuff, there's SARE.org, which is Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. It's a federal program, but they have a lot of good books. I like Building Soils for Better Crops. And there's actually, I think, a new edition. I need to update my picture. But you can buy the books there, but you can also get them like as a PDF for free. So if you don't mind reading on a screen, you can download the whole book for free. Likewise, the Xerxes Society, if you're interested in pollinators, has some good things. People say they're like the Audubon Society for insects. So they've got lots of interesting things about how to attract native and beneficial insects. And then K-State, you have to dig for this one. I don't know why they don't make it easier to find. It's a dated publication, but they do have this cover crop for vegetable growers available in their bookstore. Which maybe is ksu.edu now. They changed that, but it used to be kstate.edu. That's all I've got, so.